In December 2017, I took a day trip alone to Florence, from Milan where I was visiting a friend who was studying abroad. I remember waking up at 5 a.m. to catch a cab to the train station, and riding on the train for 2 hours, filled with anticipation and excitement about finally seeing Florence, a city that I had learned so much about in my first history of architecture class. I watched the sunrise over Florence as we pulled into the Santa Maria Novella train station at 8 a.m. on a Sunday morning. I hopped off the train, ready to follow my carefully scheduled itinerary for the day, as I was only able to visit for 12 short hours. As I started heading away from the train station towards the Uffizi Museum, I stumbled upon a building that I knew well, the Basilica di Santa Maria Novella with the facade by Alberti. This stumbling upon of things I had learned of would become a theme throughout the day. It was a masterful piece of architecture, a prime example of Renaissance design, and yet, on that day, it was a simple if not beautiful church, standing proud in its small, quiet piazza that I, for a short moment in time, had all to myself. I continued on my walk south towards the Arno River and the Uffizi Museum, and observed a few locals emerging from their homes. Eventually, I reached the river and walked along the bank, observing the still shadowy west side of the Ponte Vecchio, and eventually its brilliantly lit east side. Just as I was about to reach the Uffizi, an arcade appeared that was so long it almost felt as if I was looking in a mirror. While in the morning I was able to steadily enjoy my journey through this arcade, I remember attempting to walk along this same arcade in the evening. It was overflowing with people and scooters, and was a completely different experience. I made it to the Uffizi, and in the courtyard formed by its U-shaped galleries, I got my first glimpse of the Palazzo Vecchio, and my first hint of the masterful alignment of Florence that would, unbeknownst to me initially, steadily guide me through the city. I saw this alignment on a greater scale once I entered the galleries above and saw for the first time the Duomo, crowning the skyline beyond the campanile of the Palazzo Vecchio. I took to the streets after visiting the Uffizi in search of lunch, found some in a small shop, and made my way back to the Piazza del Signoria to enjoy my sandwich. Finally, by this point in the day, the city seemed to be fully awake, and the piazza was bustling with people. I enjoyed my lunch watching people look at the palazzo. I was in this public place among strangers who I couldn't speak to, and while I was a part of it, I was also isolated, merely an observer. Following lunch, I proceeded towards what I had been looking most forward to seeing, the Cathedral di Santa Maria del Fiore. I remember weaving through the borderline claustrophobic streets and watching it grow bigger and bigger before me. I remember my first thought when I actually saw it up close being that I didn't realize that the dark marble in the facade was actually green, and how pictures I had seen before didn't do it justice. My time ticket to walk to the top of the Duomo wasn't until later in the afternoon, so I decided to roam around the streets surrounding it to kill some time. I chose a random side street and followed it until I hit a small piazza with a building I immediately recognized, the Hospital of the Innocents. This wasn't even something I remembered being in Florence, and I couldn't believe that I had happened to stumble upon it. This piazza was much quieter than the space I had just left, but my breath was almost taken away as much by it as when I first saw the Duomo, because this was a place that I had learned about while sitting in a classroom in Atlanta, and here I was, halfway around the world a year later, taking it in person. What made the contrast between the two spaces even more remarkable to me was that they were both designed by the same architect, Brunelleschi. I made my way back to the Duomo, and once I arrived, I sat on a bench, waiting to enter, while listening to a musician performing in the street. Once I entered the Duomo, I had a brief time to observe the sanctuary before beginning my climb to the top. From the top, I could look down on the labyrinthine city that I had easily navigated throughout the morning. I then descended the dome and hiked to the top of the bell tower, and was met with an unsurprisingly similar view. Before crossing the Arno River to watch the sunset in the Piazza di Michelangelo, I took a quick walk into the public area, though we were allowed into the private courtyard, of the Palazzo Vecchio. The contrast between the quiet serenity of this courtyard and what I knew was the bustling Piazza del Signore on the other side amazed me. I made my way down the riverbank, crossed a bridge, and headed for the Piazza di Michelangelo. The south side of Florence was markedly quieter and more residential than the northern side, though they were separated by merely 200 feet. When I reached the Piazza Michelangelo, there was again a breathtaking landscape before me, of a city who, though was so new to me, felt so familiar. I was in a public space surrounded by many people, tourist and native alike. While I enjoyed a private moment looking upon others, I even observed a father and daughter enjoying a private moment in the parking lot behind me as he was teaching her to ride a bike. As I descended the many steps from the Piazza Michelangelo, I headed for my last stop of the day, the Ponte Vecchio. I got a brief glance of Florentine nightlife, and once again got to listen to some music and observe some people shopping and dining. After crossing the Ponte Vecchio, I came upon the arcade I had traversed alone in the morning on my way to the Uffizi, which was now transformed, humming with chatter and laughter and bodies. As the streets were becoming ever more crowded, I made my way back to the train station, as I had taken in all of Florence that I could in a single day, and took a sleepy train ride back to Milan.